everyone. I am really looking forward to this conversation today with Nina Rao. Nina learned traditional chants, bhajans, from her grandfather in a village in South India when she was 9 years old. The chants quietly stayed with her until she rediscovered chanting with Krishna Das in New York in 1996. For many years, Nina has been Krishna Das's business manager and accompanies him on stage. In 2007, she recorded the track Nina Chalisa on Krishna Das's CD Flow of Grace. January 2013, she released her debut album, Antarayami, Knower of All Hearts. August 2017, her second album, Anubhav. Nina regularly leads kirtan, workshops, and retreats in her hometown of Brooklyn, New York, and beyond. Welcome, Nina. It's really, well, here we are in the midst of things.
So we're definitely beyond.
Yes, yes. It's quite an interesting moment to connect. I'd like to start by exploring the past a little bit. How did you get interested in meditation? What's the origins of that story?
Right. Well, it's interesting that you're interviewing me about meditation because I don't actually consider myself a meditator. Mm-hmm. However, I've grown to understand that this practice of chanting is actually a doorway or a pathway to the state of meditation. So one can practice meditation methods, and then there's the state of meditation that you achieve, hopefully, inevitably, for periods of time, and then ultimately one is always in a meditative state. That's what our goal would be. Honestly, I fell upon it because I was born into an Indian family, and though my parents were very geared towards the West, because at the time, it felt like the best opportunity for their 3 daughters was to not try and have a profession in India, but to come to the West. My father was he loved America, he loved New York, and he wanted us to grow up here. So our household was not so much involved in traditional spiritual practices. However, when we did go to visit my grandfather in his village in South India, I noticed that he had a harmonium. And I was always interested in music, but I never really studied it formally. And, in those days when you went on summer holiday, there was no phone, there was no, internet. You just kind of make do with everything that was there. So I started just playing the harmonium. And my grandfather was an engineer for the British government when he was in service. And by the time we started going to visit him, he was retired. So he was at home and he was putting around and digging the well on the property and collecting coconuts, and we had a mango orchard, and it was that kind of a life. So I said, I was tootling around on the harmonium one day, and he said, do you know how to play? And I said, no, why don't you show me? So he said, well, I'll show you if you sing with me. And, I had no background, and we had never done this kind of chanting at home. And so then everybody gathered around the harmonium. My mother, who had no idea knew how to chant, and her sisters, and everybody came. And he taught us this simple chant to Ganesha, which actually is on Antarayami. And I have a recording of him singing it, which is really lovely. It's at the end of the second disc. It's called Vinayaka Always. Vinayaka is another name for Ganesh. And what happened was we all kind of entered into this space very naturally, where we were singing call and response with him. And the words, as I understand now, they have a power of their own to draw you into your own self. There was no way for me to understand any of this at the time. I just knew that I loved it. And the other thing that happened during either that stay or another stay at his place, they had satsang at home, where they gathered together the community, and in the living room, they set up this beautiful altar, and the men and women were sitting, each on either side. And my grandfather was sort of the musician of the village, for sure. He was a natural musician. He could play flute, he sang, he played harmonium. But also, the younger children and the other adults were all leading chants at the same time. So it was really a community. You didn't have to be an expert at anything. The intention was the same. That's all. That they wanted to come together in that space of devotion. Oh, so we had that night, and I had this experience which kind of stayed with me, and I didn't really talk about it with anybody until many, many years later. And I was in New York. I went for a yoga retreat, and this was back in the early days, back in 1996. And Krishnadas had just begun sort of chanting. He had released one album. Yoga was kind of taking off in New York and other places, I guess. And I had met my yoga teacher in my gym. And she was being sort of very non-spiritual in the yoga classes because it was in a gym, so she was keeping it on the down low. But I was listening to the chanting she was playing in the background. And anyway, I loved the yoga practice, and she ended up having a retreat. And at the retreat, she had invited Krishnadas to lead the satsang in the evening. And I was still, even though I was pulled into the yoga and I had the yoga, the chanting was sort of in my peripheral ear vision, I hadn't fully sort of fallen into that practice at all. I was listening to a lot of Indian classical music, but that was it. And when he came in, I remember thinking, this is going to be terrible. This is going to be terrible. This is like a white guy in black sweatpants, and I have no idea what he's going to do now. But he sat down to sing, and he opened his mouth with Sri Ram Jai Ram, and I entered back into that space when I recall now, as I was a child, where you understand that the space is around you, that you're connected to the space and all beings in that space. And there's a certain amount of peace that arises from that. For the 1 second, if we can allow ourselves to be there in that moment. And so after that, I made it my intention to chant with him as much as I could. And we became friends during that retreat. And basically, nothing's changed since then. I still go and chant with him whenever I can. But now we're talking about however many years now, 30-something years, that I've been with him chanting, not 30, is it 1996, whatever that is. And chanting with him, but also his presence in the chanting community, yoga community, spiritual world in general has grown so much, and I was able to be part of that, to see it on its way. So I do manage his business for him now, but the best part of the job is to be able to go and travel with him and chant as well, and have him as my friend.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. And so you talk about that life is a meditation, and that chanting is an entry point to essentially experientially recognizing that, and being able to participate in it. So would you say that, I guess I'm curious then, when did you start to notice the relationship between the chanting and its impact on your life?
Good question. That's a really good question. Obviously the immediate impact is that all I wanted to do was chant. So that was the first thing. And I'm inclined to follow what resonates with me, as I hope everyone will. And it seemed like a really beautiful thing, because I developed a whole community of friends who also wanted to do this. Other people might have thought I was a little crazy at the time, because I had a lot of friends in the banking business, and they were like, okay. But I didn't care. I just knew that this was what my heart needed. And, a lot of things fell away actually at that time. And I think about it now. I connected with my roots in a particular way that felt really wholesome. And and everybody else was so interested in it too. So it became part of how we lived our lives together. We started traveling back to India together, and I could go to Neem Karoli Baba's temple, and I met my guru there. And I think meeting her, Siddhima, she's actually in that picture, which you can't see very well, but she was a very close devotee of Neem Karoli Baba, and she was in the body in those days, and I developed a relationship with her, and that definitely changed my life in a big way. And so it all kind of came together, and also working with Krishnadas and seeing him as an elder and how he had walked the path himself. I mean, we have very different backgrounds in how we grew up, but how we were going to meet each moment, it was a very nice way for me to learn how I could live my life, because one of the earliest things that he said that I remembered so well was he said that if you don't trust your own heart, who are you going to trust? And that's remained with me always. And I feel that the chanting practice for me has helped me to really connect with that space inside of me where I have the confidence that what I might be thinking and feeling and a direction I might want to go in is right. It's right for me. Doesn't have to be right for everybody else, but it's right for me. But the other thing is, what is the ultimate goal of all of our practices? To find some peace of mind. And with that peace of mind, we can connect with other beings in the best way possible. And if I look back and I try to think of what are the benefits of the practice, I think it's been that. Is that, I don't know if it's age or it's that or both. Just the ability to maybe feel a little bit less a victim of the things that happen in our lives, and really more about as a witness and letting your life kind of flow through you in a way, and learning from that and contributing in the best way possible by just having some compassion for yourself and all beings. And that's about it. I don't know when we might ever be liberated from this, constant barrage of thoughts and the prison that we live in our thoughts. And I understand that all these practices are to help us kind of unlock us from that. But that means you have to do practice. And in order to do practice, you have to want to do it. You're not going to do something that you don't want to do. So I have a lot of friends who are meditators on different levels. But for me, the chanting practice is very helpful for a lot of reasons. It's super hard for me, which doesn't mean it's wrong or the wrong practice, to sit and watch my breath. But if I start with a mantra practice, it allows me to then move into that place where I can sit even for a few minutes and just be quiet. So the mantra has that power. And mantra, man means mind or heart-mind, the connected place between the heart and the mind. And tra is a syllable that implies protection. So mantra is protection for the mind. So if you're using something that is going to help you take refuge in this moment and letting the thoughts come and go, that's a sort of a protection for us. Then you can actually go in a particular way. It feels, for me, this is my experience. And so it's become everything. It's my path, it's the goal, it's the refuge, it's the practice, it's everything. That's what it is for me.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm feeling compelled to draw the bridge because what you're sharing is just so on point with our kind of approach broadly. That state that we enter into, we could say that that's a heightened skill state, and you could say that there are many avenues to develop those skills, including chanting, that chanting is a meditation for the very reasons that you've said. And that, yeah, I think for people who struggle to have a silent seated practice, it's great to be reassured that chanting is equally valid to any silent practice, that it's all about that same, like you said, that state, which, you know, we call a set of skills, but it's basically the same idea. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that helps reassure people that there are many avenues and that it's up to the individual to find a way that resonates for them. And I hear that you found in the, you know, connecting with Krishna Das, you found community, and that community also gave you, kind of empowered you to find your own voice, your own way through this process, and then to be able to give back. I loved that complete arc that you described in your journey.
Well, the nature of the practice also in this particular type of chanting, which is Nam Sankirtan, which is Nam meaning the repetition of the name. Sankirtan means chanting in a group. So what we're doing when we're practicing together is helping each other, because it's call and response. So when you hear everybody singing around you and you're pulled away by a thought, then you hear the person, so you come back. So we help each other. Just as when you sit in a practice with people, you know, though everybody is silent, that collective energy is supportive for everyone. Or you go to a yoga asana class, for example. I mean, that also is helpful for meditation. Ultimately, that's what all the physical practices are for anyway. To let those energies flow through you, and then you take it into a particular place quietly and open your heart. So, the community was very helpful. And when it also gives you a place to come back to. So, for example, now we can't go out because of our situation here with this virus. And it's very interesting because it's given me a chance actually to do a longer home practice than I normally do, because we do many things. We're sending our kids to school. We have work to do. We're going to kickboxing classes, whatever we might be doing. And now everything is at home. But still, just like you and I are connecting right now, by you and me talking about this, we're creating satsang. And I think it's a sacred space. It's a reminder of that place that is within it. And we need that support. We need it. It's one of the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. There's actually a very beautiful passage in the beginning of the Ramcharitmanas, which is a version of the Ramayana, where the poet Saint Tulsidas, before he even starts telling the story of Ram and Hanuman and Sita and all these wonderful beings, he has a whole, I think there are almost 300 obeisances before we even start. But the very first one, somewhere in the beginning, is that he is honoring the fact that when we come together to read these stories or to remember the leelas of the great beings, which we do when we chant, when we read stories like the Ramayana, the moment we come together to do that, we're creating what's called a sangam or a prayag. So prayag means the confluence of sacred rivers. Like in India, it would be the Ganga, Yamuna, and the Saraswati, which is an invisible river, but it's considered to come underground and meet up at that point. The moment we do that, when we come together to read the Leelas, we're creating that same prayag here. And at these sacred places and times, beings that we don't even know, the saints, the devas, all the celestial beings, they come to listen. So we have their support as well.
That's beautiful. And true, when we experience what you were talking about, that moment in with your grandfather, that union, every time we experience that, it's all true.
It's a remembering, right? Doesn't it feel like that? Like some place that, oh yeah, that's familiar.
Yeah.
And we've forgotten.
Yeah, that's right. Coming home. I'm curious. I would love to hear more about meeting your guru and how that's influenced your experience.
Yeah. You know, when I first met Krishnadas, his guru Neem Karoli Baba had already left the body. But part of the satsang with him was him telling stories of his guru, and it really made my longing for a guru that much stronger. I guess I had some kind of innate longing for someone that I felt would have all the answers for me, or what, I'm not even sure what I was looking for. But when he started talking about his guru, I thought, that's that what I was feeling when he talked about his guru is what I was remembering and what I was seeking. And when I talked to him, I was expressing my irritation with the fact that he had said to me, he said, "You don't need a guru in the body." And I said, "Well, that's very easy for you to say, because you just spent the last weekend talking about your time with your guru, and that's like the most important thing." So he said a lot of people will say, which is that, your guru, you don't find a guru, the guru finds you, and not everyone needs a guru in the body. So I sort of let go of that notion, I guess. But what I did say to him at that point was, I said, I want to go to Kenchi, to the place where you were with him. That feels like a very strong pull for me. And I traveled to India a lot. In those days, I was taking people on wildlife trips to see tigers in India. So I was always there anyway, a few times a year. And I thought, I'm going to go visit the temple. So so he said, okay, well, if you're going, then I'll write a letter for you and you can meet Siddhima, who nobody spoke about in those days. And that's because she didn't want to be talked about. She kept herself really covered and veiled in a certain way. But even during the time when Krishnadas was and his friends were with Neem Karoli Baba, there were the mothers, as they were called, who were with Maharaji, as we call him, and they just weren't out in the open. They served him, but when he was out with his devotees, they weren't often not there, but they were there in the temple. And she was the one who he left and trusted with the care of the temples when he left the body. So after Maharaji left the body, people went, if they did come back to the temple, many devotees decided that now Maharaji lived in their hearts, they didn't need to go back there. But there were others who went to her because she held that space because of her devotion to Maharaji. And in all the years that I spent with her, off and on, visiting her almost every year for about 20, 22 years, if ever you asked her a question, she would say, "I don't know anything. Maharaji said this." And they say that when people who were with Maharaji said, he said, "I don't know anything," Hanuman would ask Hanuman. So nobody wanted to take responsibility for what you would know in your own heart, basically, it seems like, for me. But because of the type of being that she is or was, what I've come to understand about my relationship with her, which was very personal for me because I did see her in person. I spent time with her. When I first met her, I was single. I got married. I had a child. I got divorced. I moved on in my life, and all those things happened in her presence to a certain degree. And I could have her guidance on a regular basis. While, I'd go to India and I could ask her questions and, that sort of a thing. So on that level, I feel really grateful that I had that experience with her. But what I understand from that experience with her was that everything she ever told me was already something that I knew in my own heart. And if she could trust that, then why don't I? Also, she was a very loving being. If you were in her presence, she really was mother. She took care of everybody. And the feeling that you got with her was safety and security and clear, crystal clear wisdom. In the simplest way she said things. It wasn't like she gave great teachings and in any sort of long lecture or anything like that. It was simple, it was clear, down to earth, and deeply spiritual at the same time.
Do you remember a particular moment like that? Something specific, like a vignette? If not, that's fine. But
yeah. I have to think about that for a moment, but I will say to you, like, there were so many times you would go. I've been to her with her, and all kinds of things were happening. From I can't even explain the craziness. We all have like insane things that are happening in our lives at every moment. But I remember this one instance when I had gone to see her, and a lot of things had happened. I had a family member who was very ill, and my family was trying to figure out how they should. She had a lot of mental problems, and she had been kept. She was in India, and in India the mental health care system is very not supportive. And luckily for the way in which Indians live, she was living at home with another family member until it got so difficult that we had to figure out what we could do, because she was going to be a danger for herself and others. And I was talking to Ma about this a lot in terms of like, what should we do? Should we take her? And I found a friend who was a psychiatrist. It's a long story, but we found a place where she could go. That was a sort of an asylum or I don't even know what the correct word is for it, where people there would be psychiatrists on duty to help her and so on. And I said, but my other family member felt really bad about sending her there, because she said, all my life I've been taking care of her. At this stage, should I really be sending her away? And Siddhima said, well, you should also understand, yes, she is going through this, my aunt who was having the disturbance, but also how is it affecting everybody else in the house? And maybe this has to happen this way, so that everybody can have the right atmosphere to live in. So she made a very clear decision about it. And it wasn't that it was not a loving decision, but she made it okay for us to go down that road. As it happens, my aunt ended up still staying with the family. And she passed away very, very quickly. And my other family felt very happy that she was with them when she passed away. So it was okay. But the fact that Siddhima said that to us made it okay for us to even think that. And so we could make the choice. So it's a little subtle, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
absolutely, yes, that there is a permission giving,
Yeah.
and we no longer have to get caught in our guilt or shame or whatever emotions might be interfering with our clarity. We can, through that person's energy, drop all stickiness around that and find a clear point of a point of clarity, where then whatever unfolds from that. There's not like someone's is a fortune teller or something. What they're doing is they're clearing a path for the best possible arising from love. Yeah.
And she had, because of the place where she was coming from, she had a very holistic vision of everything. And like you said, it did give us permission. And so we made the decision, and ultimately that's not what happened. But like you said, it gave us clarity. And that's whenever I think of her, she was worshipped as Durga, which is the remover of difficulties as well. And one of the weapons of Durga is a double-sided sword to cut through, to help us make the right decisions and to get through negativities. But also I see her as Saraswati, who is the goddess of wisdom and knowledge, because it's, and not just knowledge in a textual sense, but really like, how are we finding the discernment to make the decisions that feel right in our hearts and that are good for everybody?
Yeah, I want to highlight that that cutting through, that there is a way to both make hard decisions and do it lovingly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's such a deep lesson that we often forget. Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely.
So, this is such a moving connection. I have to say, I'm really enjoying this conversation with you. Really feeling as we're speaking. So, I guess I'm curious. Then there's this whole practical life, the whole practical side of your life. Do we want to talk a little bit about how that intersects? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, we all have practical lives, right? We have to eat food. We have to pay our rent. I feel very fortunate that I do the work that I do, because I would never have imagined it as a career choice for myself. I went to school, and I was going to go to medical school as a young person, and because we moved countries a lot, we grew up in different countries, I ended up being in India at a very difficult time where I just couldn't make the grade that you had to in order to get entrance into medical school, because it's super hard and very limited options. So I left the whole science thing, and I decided to do commerce, because that was my only other option. It's unlike here where you have so many different, you can go in with an undecided major and create your own major. None of that was available to me. So I finally did my degree in economics because I loved the idea of studying people, but sort of numerically in a sort of way. And now when I look at it, I realize how much of it was wrong. And it's interesting to do it with my daughter, because she's also studying a version of it now. And it's so evolved over the last 30 years. So it's interesting to see that. But so I started off in the banking world, where I was trading on the floor of a Japanese bank, and I thought that was cool because that's what everybody was doing. Until there was a crash on Wall Street back then in 1987, as we're about to have now. And I had people are people wherever you go. And though I connected with the people there, I understood that this really drove them, what they were doing. Like, they really were motivated to wake up in the morning and look at numbers and models and like find a way to make this X amount of money with a tiny fraction of an interest rate spread. And it just wasn't exciting to me. It just wasn't. I mean, I don't have anything against them at all. And so I just quit because I didn't know what I wanted to do. But what I did another opportunity came to me to start a small wildlife company, a safari company for photographing wildlife, not a hunting safari. Because I had been in East Africa with my parents for a little while. And so my father said, well, this guy wants to open a company. Would you like to work for him? And I thought this would be cool, starting something from. So I did that for quite a few years, actually. I spent a lot of time traveling in Africa and getting very involved in conservation of wildlife and finding ways to raise money for it. So I was running my business simultaneous to doing that. And then I realized I also wanted to take people to India, and I created my own company at that time, and took people on tours of India, and we kind of mixed visits to sacred temples along with going to the national parks. And what I understand now, for me, is that talk about being in a meditative state is like being in nature is very important for me as well. So somehow I was able to do both those things. And it was during that time that I met Krishnadas as well. So I was running my business, and every time I was back home, I would be chanting with him, which he was doing a lot in New York in those days. But I also started chanting on my own at home. And I remembered the chants that my grandfather had taught us. And slowly over time, as I was sitting at the harmonium, certain melodies would come to me, and I started chanting them. And we would all sit together and chant the Hanuman Chalisa in a group. And one day, Krishnadas heard this one version that I was chanting, and he asked me to sing that on Flow of Grace, which was back in 2007 when he made a compilation for his book and CD. So, but it was never in my mind that would ever be sort of people ask me, how did you start chanting? It never was a career option, it still isn't. I still chant just because I love it. I pay my rent, and I buy my food because I work with Krishnadas and I manage his business for him. But that just also organically grew. When I first started working with him, I still had my safari business, and I had a website called wildindia.com at the time. And so things were happening on the internet, and I said, Krishnadas, let's make you a little page, and we can because he was starting to tour. So we made wildindia.com/Krishnadas, and it was like not even his own domain, So we put his events up there and a little bio about him, and then we got him an email address. I mean, I still have the old business card that he used to carry around with him, which I made on my computer, and it said, "Have harmonium, will travel." We still have it. That was his line. And so that grew, and he had one album that he recorded at that time, and now, of course, he has about 14 or 15 albums. It just all manifested somehow. I don't know. I was doing my wildlife trips for a while, and then I got married, and I was pregnant with Uma, who's now on her way to college. And at that time, the World Trade Center towers came down, and the whole travel industry changed at that point, and I realized things were moving on to the internet. Like, if I were to try and do those kind of tours, I would be competing with people selling much differently. And it was just not going to happen because I had a kid. So I actually ended up closing that business and giving it to a friend. And I started working part-time for Krishnadas at that point. But I had no idea that it was going to become, anything like this. And my tendency with all these things is to start something, and then it just becomes a project, and I don't know, it just becomes like that. So here we are. And all these years later, I'm still grateful that I'm working with him, and he's doing what he wants to do. And I've been able to record on my own. Never thought that would happen ever. And so I have those 2 albums, which are out there for people. And, people ask me all the time, like, how can I chant? And I say, well, Katie says this too. He's like, don't quit your day job because it's not really a good way to try to actually make a living. If it's not easy. It's not that it's not a good way. It's not easy to tour and have a family. Like, all that stuff is really difficult. But so the practical life for me is what is it? Basically, I'm on my computer pretty much all day. answering emails, organizing tours, managing finances, doing creative stuff for his website. It's now grown into a little mini cottage industry here with all of us working in our separate homes. We have Sarina, who's handling the digital library. Janaki manages all the physical merchandise. We have a few people editing workshops and transcribing for us. And we have a sound engineer, and we have our musicians, who join us at events. And all that has to be managed. So that's my job. And but I have a lot of flexibility. It really worked for me while Uma was very young, and but what's also happened is that because I'm invited to chant in places on my own, I've actually been traveling a lot on my own as well, and trying to make it not interfere with KD's schedule, because I like to sing with him too. So what's interesting right now is this is a complete reset, that we're all sitting at home. And what all the work I do every day is for that moment that we get there in front of all those people and we chant together, and we can't do that right now. So we're just finding other ways to connect with people. I'm doing some online workshops with my friend Chandra Easton, and KD is doing an online satsang this week as well. So everybody's finding ways to make it work. And hopefully, if everybody stays home, we'll move through this without too many casualties and too much suffering, which there already is.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And I think people, what I love about it is the way you found a path that incorporated every aspect of yourself, that you brought in the business side of yourself. You didn't just say, hey, that's a waste. You saw the use for it, and it came into play in a way that was meaningful for you, given your vocation, your calling. And actually, if you think about the music industry in general, you need the exact skills that you have these days. You can't really, gone are the days when, the record company did that all for you. So actually, it all kind of came to bear in a very organic way for you to do what you're doing. I guess I would ask, you mentioned earlier that you're doing more chanting alone at home. Do you have any suggestions for people who are drawn to this chanting? Do you have any recommendations? I mean, maybe they can listen to you or Krishna Das, or, and chant along on their own. What would you recommend?
Well, definitely there's so much music out there online that you can find of various people doing mantra chanting and different styles. So certainly, that's what I did in the beginning when I first met Krishnadas. I just found all the CDs back in the day, and I found everything I could lay my hands on, whether they were Indian artists, because there were much fewer, there weren't that many Western artists. But now all you have to do is go on Spotify or YouTube, and it's free. There are lots of, just from our little corner, for example, one of the things people love to chant is the Hanuman Chalisa, and they want to learn. And so I'm actually going to do an online workshop sometime soon. But one of the things I point people to is a video that I have on my YouTube channel that has, we're doing many rounds of the Hanuman Chalisa, but it has the words going across the screen. So you can read and chant at the same time, and they're in a few different melodies. And we have the same for Krishnadas on his YouTube channel as well. There's a whole live kirtan, beautifully produced. And you get the feeling like you're in a group because it's filmed in a church. We had 1,500 people there that day, and it's really beautiful. But there are also ways to just simply, there are people doing online workshops, and you can be in a much smaller group and be live with them as well. At the same time, like you and I are talking right now, it creates a particular kind of space energetically. So that's worth looking at. In this day and age, we're just some of my friends and I are just going on Zoom together and just doing practice together, just simply without music or anything, just sitting and being together like that, if you can. And then, of course, always a good idea to sit at your altar or wherever you do your practice, or if you want to go for a walk in nature and do a mantra practice where you're just repeating the mantra and you have your mala and walk around. Like, all of this is very juicy and really good for you, good for all of us. You can do your yoga practice with chanting music, so many different ways. It's all out there. Yeah. Yeah.
Any final words of encouragement, support, inspiration?
I have to say, and I say this like at any point in time, which is that it is important to do a practice. One of the things Siddhima, that was a main teaching that Siddhima gave us all the time. We'd have questions about all kinds of things, but what I wanted to say to you at that time when you asked me the question before was that I was reading through one of my journals, because I did write when she said specific things to us. And in Hindi, she said to me, Tum socho mat, paat karo, which basically means don't think too much, go and do your prayers. And I think basically all the answers will unfold as we do practice. And the more we think about it, the more we get locked into our minds about something. And if we just for a second, just like go to the practice, whatever it is, if it's breath practice, it's asana practice, it's chanting practice, whatever your practice is, and have some awareness that the thoughts are coming and you're not going to try to hold on to them. You want to, or if you do get caught in them, a moment will arise where you'll let go of them. It happens. By grace, this happens. So give a few minutes in the day for that to happen. And if you can do for me, the chanting practice, I don't just chant, I actually read. So try to put your phone away for a little bit, and just, even if it's 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, and try to put as much focus and intention in it as possible. And then go on and do everything else. And when you do that, you're building up a reservoir inside yourself. You don't even have to think about that, but it's just happening. And the moment when you have that reservoir, when things get difficult, that'll immediately become available to you. So I guess that's been my experience. You also asked me, like, how did you know that chanting was changing your life or benefiting your life? Is after a while, I just started to see that there was just a little bit of a buffer there between reacting to a situation and allowing the right skillful action to follow.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time today to share your wisdom and your journey. And this is an important time for this. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I thank you, because when you ask me to do this, it makes me sit here and think about this and get in this space with you. So we can do that for each other.